my team and my world, and I think what most applies to you all today, is kind of the conservation work that we're doing. We're addressing threats to birds. This is more of an urban or built environment type thing, but we're doing a lot with window collisions. So up to 1 billion birds a year die from running into windows. So we're retrofitting existing problematic glass, working on new development, and then educating people about how light reduction can help birds and help humans and help everyone's health, and even producing alerts, which you're seeing in the bottom right there, to tell people the worst nights. So if you're not willing to turn off your lights for an entire fall or spring migratory period, maybe you'll do it for the nights that have the most number of birds flying overhead. In addition to that, especially with our statewide work, we're trying to do research and monitoring and partnering with other organizations. This is our Sea Grant fellow from last year doing some work with Georgia DNR and Manomet out on the coast, banding some oyster catchers. So we're really trying to increase our presence and develop programs that go with that type of monitoring. We have worked with shade grown coffee and other things that are addressing the challenges that are facing our birds. So by purchasing certain coffees, you can help preserve their habitat with an agroforestry type model down in Central America. And then we're doing species specific work like the chimney swift tower on your right, which is something that could be suitable for some of you all if you're interested or want to learn more and you do have some open space. It's a way to help the birds that are in our state. And then a little bit more applicable to what we're talking today, we have a lot of native plant and habitat-based work. So the Wildlife Sanctuary Program, which I'm going to tie back in just a moment, is designed to how do we make your backyard better for birds? How can you help with your limited landscape? It's been very popular. We have hundreds of properties, over 600 in the metro Atlanta area. That's kind of allowed us to pivot to now hosting native plant sales, where we're getting the word out on the importance of natives for birds, how to get those into your landscape. And then that also feeds into our restoration work, which is what you're seeing on the right. Historically, this has been pretty small, to be honest. We've been doing a lot of work in the Atlanta area at urban parks, tackling small acreage compared to what you all are looking at. But again, it's allowed us to message and to make our spaces as friendly as possible for our native birds. So that's kind of who we are and what we have been doing and what we are still doing, as well as just why birds are such a joy to many of us. But I think there are some specific opportunities that align more with you all today, how we are planning on growing, and also why a birder might want to come to your piece of private land and what that could look like moving forward. So one thing that I kind of briefly mentioned is the habitat restoration and invasive plant removal. So we've been doing that historically, grant funded, smaller projects, oftentimes subcontracted out with other restoration experts in Atlanta. But over the past year, we've been building out our own restoration crew and working on not only our own grant funded work, but being partners on other grants and now seeking out contracted work. So this is Gabe Anderley. He's our main contact running our crew of habitat restoration assistants. And we are getting more and more involved with burns. We're never going to lead burns, but we assist others on larger burns. This was out at Panola Mountain State Park, where we're doing some restoration with DNR and with other area partners. We're working with the Army Corps. We're working with some land trusts down south of Atlanta. Again, with this general idea of how can we make these spaces more productive for our wildlife, with birds kind of being the focus. So I know there are some programs that you all could tap into if you're interested about native plant removal and making your product and or your habitats as native and productive as possible. And this is something that we are growing and could be part of the conversation or a consideration should you want to look into this further. So again, we have some focal strategic areas that we're building out, but we would be open to chatting about this depending on what's going on. Another thing that we're doing is we recently were awarded a Nrcs technical grant about the creation of bird-friendly pollinator habitat. And so, we're going to be providing documents and other resources to Nrcs and to the private land folks at DNR to disperse. So if you are active with some of these farm bill programs, you can find these resources as they become available. And again, we're really focusing on that herbaceous material, grasses, maybe some fringe parts of your land, depending on how it's constructed, and how that can be beneficial for birds and for the private landowners who can create and foster such spaces. One thing that might be relevant here, and Bob's coming on after me, but something that DNR is doing is the idea of a birding trail. So at DNR, there are already a couple of sections of trail here in Georgia, down on the coast and in the South Rivers. Through this grant, we have in place the creation of some sort of Georgia Working Lands birding trail. So we're very early on in this process, but this could be an incentive and tie into what I'm going to talk about the next few slides for some of you landowners, depending on what your space looks like. If there is an interest opening up to bird watchers or to working with us or potentially DNR on this. But we're looking for these spots that there is some sort of production going on, but there is interesting bird habitat or birds being detected. So this is very much new and still in the works, but something that I think could be appealing to some of you or others who are active. All right, I mentioned our sanctuary program and how I was going to tie back into that. So again, that's been relatively small scale. We've been looking at, a 1/4 acre to 3 acres, really, really small, mainly backyards. We are going to expand that program up and kind of not really expand it up. We're reimagining it and creating a new program that we hope to gear towards large properties, a large property recognition of some sorts, where we can find those spaces that are either protected some way or doing the right type of management for wildlife, for certain plants, other things like that. Maybe those that are open to allowing birders onto their property. We're still working on the scorecard or the rubric. But with that would come some sort of recognition, maybe some best management practices, other documents, and other opportunities. We're very open to discussing this because this is also something that's new. We've been very successful on the small scale, and we think there could be an appetite for doing something like this larger, especially if some of you are a bit more bird or wildlife focused in your interests. And so thinking about bird watching on your property and why some of us crazy bird people would want to come there or would want to come anywhere. What drives us when we're birding? So people watch them in various ways. Like I said, a lot of people just look at their feeders out back. Some people go bird watching once a year when they're on vacation, and some people are diehard. And there's a lot of us who are pretty committed to the hobby. And when we go birding, we tend to look for diverse areas, so spots that might give us a large species list of birds. There might be particular target species we're going for. We might be trying to look for geographic variation, which I'll talk about. And sometimes we just want convenience. So it kind of depends. And again, everyone does it a little bit differently. And it is kind of shaped by the seasons and what birds are present. But with that in mind, there are ways to either make your space might be appealing, or any space is appealing for birds. A lot of it has to do with what habitats are present. Are they rare, or are they those that might be hard to access? There are cane breaks. If you have cane on your property, that could indicate some really interesting birds. Longleaf, I know that's not something you're producing, but if you have safe havens or certain spots like that, that could of course be interesting to birders. Wetlands, grasslands, riparian corridors, if there are hardwoods mixed in with some of your pines, that could really increase the diversity. So all of this is what's going to be interesting from a habitat standpoint. And those habitats tend to mean interesting birds. So if you have these riparian areas or some hardwoods mixed in, you might get a lot of these warblers or other songbirds moving through. Any of the longleaf specialists or rarer or harder to detect birds like Swainson's warblers, waterfowl. These types of things are going to want to make someone target a site. They're going to want to go there to find that bird. And so as we think about the potential economic drivers or getting people to a site, if these birds are there, these habitats are there, that's going to be of interest. And us birders, one thing most of us like to do is we like to keep a list, whether it's a life list, which is every bird you've seen in your life, what you've seen in Georgia throughout your life, or over even the course of a calendar year. And now it's becoming a big deal to even look at counties, which I think could be of interest. And in addition to that listing, many of us are pretty diverse in our interests. So even if there's a spot that doesn't have an endangered species or some really hard to detect species, us birders like to get out. Many of us, this is from a group I led down on Dolphin Island this spring. We tend to look at snakes and flowers and a bit of everything. So we like the new, we like the unique, we like diversity when we're going out. So I think with that understanding of bird watchers, one way to really kind of illustrate this point is through this Ebird database. So Ebird is a global database where bird watchers can keep track of their sightings, and those sightings can be used by conservationists. And so as you enter your sightings, you get this little dashboard. It tells you how many species you've seen and where you went and how long you were there and how many checklists. It just keeps really detailed lists of what you like. And a lot of birders use this. Hundreds of thousands of users across the globe have put in hundreds of millions of observations of birds. And so when you really get down into it, a lot of people are caring about their state list. So we're talking about Georgia in this instance, of course. And so you can see I've seen 331 species in the state. And so I'm always trying to bump that number up. And I've seen this many this year, and I'm trying to bump that number up. And so I'm willing and able to drive hours to go to a certain spot to add a new bird for the year or the state. And there are lots in the birding community who do that same thing. Now, I mentioned county birding. Ebird gives you this nice graphic where you can look at every county in the state, and it's becoming more and more trendy for people to try to bird in every county in Georgia. And so if you happen to be a landowner or manager and you have a spot in maybe more rural, out of, traditionally out of the way county, one way to get people to come is to make it open to birders, because we're trying to visit all these spots. We're trying to seek out new locations and new birds. And using Hancock County as an example, on Ebird, you can find these little dots, which you're looking at there. And those are pins for birding hotspots, areas that are generally open to the public or kind of good birding spots. Some are private, some do have restrictions. But in Hancock County, there's only 2 of those locations. So if I wanted to go there to tick it off my list or to spend more time and to learn more about it, I wouldn't know where to go. And it ends up being a lot of birding from the side of the road or whatever it might be. And again, there's a lot of us birders doing this. So if you were to make your space a destination, I believe birders would come more often than not. And so one way is thinking about birders to come. So birders are going to want to come to your property because it's being managed smartly, because hopefully there's a mix of habitats or something special, a species. One way we can do this is by working with us at Georgia Audubon. So we do custom events all the time. We can set up a small group where there is a fee attached. We're bringing a group down and we're spending some time on your space to look at the birds and habitats that are there. Potentially, depending on the site and if there are mutual interests, there could be some monitoring and restoration work, or the combination of 2. And then we have something called Georgia Bird Fest, which we have every spring, which has a number of events. It's a month long. Some of the events are just virtual workshops on native plants or photography, but many of them look like this. We're getting out with groups to places. And because we already offer a number of free field trips, we're trying to go to private lands. We're trying to go to limited access, public spaces. We're trying to get somewhere new and exciting to kind of drive that registration number, to be honest. So these are ways that we could work with you all for some economic benefit. And then what about this whole passive or individuals? If someone wanted to come to your property in Hancock County, if you were open to it, what does that look like? And this is still very much in the infancy, but we've been talking with some folks with you all about the idea of a birdwatching lease program. Is there a way to provide access or an agreement with us or with other bird watchers to come to your space? Depending on what's there, it could be seasonal. Maybe you have interesting breeding birds. Maybe you have a nice migrant stopover location. Could be those single events I'm talking about, or a year-round lease of some sort. It's probably going to be pretty dependent on your space and on what you're open to and what the habitat looks like. But I think there's some real opportunities there. And I was just talking to a landowner last week when we were down on his property, and we were trying to see how could this birding trip fit in without disturbing, some of the deer hunters that are out there, or turkey hunters. And I think there's a lot of wiggle room and lots of opportunities, again, depending on the species and the goal of what we're doing there. And there are examples of this across the country with, lots of birding ranches down in Texas. There are vineyards and farms that are on the Colorado birding trail, for example. And even though they've changed a little bit, even White Oak Pastures for a while there was getting, great numbers of eagles, and bird watchers were going down there and seeking that out as photography opportunity and staying at cabins. So there's not much structure to this yet because it's so new, but we really think this is something that could be built out, which would provide some great opportunities for our membership and for our conservation team, and also opportunities for you all to have a potential financial benefit. And I think this overlaps or goes hand in hand with some of the stuff Bob might talk about with the existing Georgia DNR programs. And so before I do kick it to Bob, I just want to say that we've been a statewide organization for just over a year, so we're still growing, but we're growing rapidly into this space, especially the private land space outside of the metro Atlanta area. And we think there's lots of ways that we can help with invasive removal or talking about how it can be managed for birds, and of course, bringing those birders. We have a few thousand members. We have this network of chapters. We have national Audubon members throughout the state. There are lots of birders here. And we are one of the main groups who are engaging that community and can help, bring people together. And so if you do want to get involved, of course, we'd love you as a member. So please consider being a member if you are interested in birds or bird adjacent. Again, I'm happy and would love to talk to you all about the little ways I know to make your land more helpful for birds and how we can bring those birding opportunities and hopefully some resources to you all. And as we work out these large property recognition programs and birding lease programs, that's something I would love to discuss more with any of you, not only to get ideas, but then to try to execute some of those moving forward. And so before I kick it to Bob, I just wanted to put out that's my email at the top. If you want to follow up with anything after our call today, if you're specifically interested and solely interested in habitat restoration, that's my colleague Gabe, and he can answer some of those questions for you. And that's the office line. Excuse me for leaving out that last second dash there. But thank you so much. And I hope Georgia Audubon can work with some of you all and continue to play a part in bringing birders and bird habitat and bird knowledge to private lands. So thank you all.
Thank you, Adam. That's very helpful context about the organization and the kind of popularity of birding in the state, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about the programs that you all have. Next, we're going to kick it over to Mr. Bob Sargent. And Bob's going to talk a little bit about kind of state programs and further about habitat management for birds. So Bob, take it away.
Thank you. Matt, can you see that presentation?
Yes, sir. We've got you.
All right. Thank you. Good job, Adam. So I'm not going to go too deeply into the topics that I'm covering because there's a great deal to it. And there are a lot of other folks who are involved in bringing these kinds of programs to landowners. And so I'm going to give you an overview of forest management for birds. And Tim and Matt's request, I'm going to talk a little bit about the voluntary public access program and how that relates to birding. So this would be more management oriented with respect to benefiting birds and less about birding, as Adam did a wonderful job covering that. So this is just an outline of the topics we cover. Like I said, forest management for birds, why manage for them, which species should you focus on, how to manage for those species, and how to get assistance, most importantly. And then I'll talk about the VPA program, define it, explain how you can enroll in it, and how you can help with it if you're interested in being a part of that program. So why manage for birds? Some of you may have seen this. It was all over the news in the last year and a half or so. There was a paper that was produced in the journal Science, and researchers looked at bird survey data going back to 1970, a variety of sources of data, such as a formal breeding bird survey, Christmas bird counts, Ebird data, as Adam described, and other sources. And the result was pretty shocking. So since 1970, last 50-year period, North America's overall total bird population has declined by some 3 billion birds. This has gotten a lot of press, and deservedly so. Steepest declines in these bird species have been detected in birds that utilize grassland habitats. Importantly for this discussion this morning, forest habitats. Species such as that chimney swift down at the bottom, who are aerial insectivores, and birds that utilize coastal habitats, specifically shorebirds. Why? Well, the main causes are age-old and taught in biology classes all over the country, mainly habitat loss and degradation of habitats needed by birds. Why manage for birds? This is overlap with a slide that Adam put up there, so I'll just touch on it briefly. I teach a 6-day ornithology class for teenagers in June on the coast every year. And I give them an intro to ornithology, basically a whole college class in the span of about an hour and a half's talk in one evening. And I end that presentation with a slide that says, why do birds matter? And I prompt the kids, you tell me. As Adam said, some people look at bird watchers as a little bit crazy. Okay, there's a little bit of an odd hobby, right? And so we find ourselves often have to explain why we're interested in birds, why we spend the money that we spend to go chasing birds all over the state to add to our county lists or our state lists, or our life lists, and so on. And so, they control pests. I tell people that birds are nature's foresters. That is, as you well know, they eat the fruits of trees and shrubs, and then they defecate the seeds somewhere else in the landscape. Those germinate, and you spread the offspring of those particular tree species to other parts of the property. Pollinators, scavengers such as vultures, like the black vulture in that picture there. I get this question from some folks in the general public, unfortunately, on a regular basis. They're such ugly birds. Why are they important? Why should we protect them? Why does federal law say you can't harm them? Scavengers play a really important role in the environment. The old canary in the coal mine expression, birds are warning signs to contaminants in the environment. Think about DDT use in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and how that decimated populations of bald eagles, peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, and so on. Of course, they're an integral part of the food chain. As Adam pointed out, some 45 million people in the United States participate in bird watching and feeding on an annual basis. Game species. There are a lot of people, of course, who spend a great deal of money to hunt game birds. Falconry, the sport, is more in the order of 4,000 years old. And you'd be surprised at the number of countries in the world that participate in falconry and the amount of money people are willing to pay to acquire falcon species. And then ecotourism, which goes back to bird feeding and bird watching. I myself have gone to Central America and other parts of the world just to see birds. And some of these countries in the tropics are largely, some communities have become largely reliant on the great deal of money that's brought to them by tourists from the States and elsewhere each year. So, the question I'm sure comes to your mind is, how do I decide what species of birds to manage on my property? In Georgia, we've got about 178 species of birds that breed in the state. The really extreme bird watchers in the state have reported over 400 species of birds detected statewide. What we like to say is you start with SWAP. That stands for a State Wildlife Action Plan. It's been referred to as our Comprehensive Wildlife Conservation Strategy. This is a 10-year plan that states are required to develop if they want to compete for federal money under the State and Tribal Wildlife Grants Program, which is a large part of the budget for my section of the Wildlife Resources Division. We literally compete against other states for our share of grant money, which pays by and large for most of the management we do for bird species in the state of Georgia. And those actions for benefit of these species are outlined in this 10-year management plan. You can see the date on that one. The last one is now 6 years old. We're now talking about putting together the outline for the next plan. These plans address the conservation needs for high priority animals, plants, and habitats in Georgia. The current plan actually addresses the conservation needs of over 600 species in the state. That's the website for it in case you're interested in going to it and having a look at it. You'll want to go to Appendix B, which is the Birds Technical Team Report. When we put this together, we establish technical teams for birds, mammals, reptiles, plants, and so on. We reach out to people like Adam to ask them to be part of these teams to help develop these strategies and the list of species that we need to focus on. And these plans place a great deal of emphasis on partnerships with private landowners like yourself, because after all, 93% of Georgia's land base is not government owned. It's owned by private citizens. And so if we're going to be effective in conservation for birds, it behooves us to develop and promote partnerships with private landowners. If you have a look at that report or that plan, if you go to our biodiversity website, you'll see that we have lists of what we call high priority species. And in 2015, when the SWAP was developed, there were 40 high priority bird species in that plan. And you'll see if you scroll down that list, plants make up 300 of the species. Fishes are way up there, terrestrial arthropods. There's a lot of species in that plan. So what's a high priority species? If you look at the paragraph in the upper right corner, these of course include federally listed species under the Endangered Species Act. Georgia has an endangered wildlife law. So we have our own threatened and endangered species. Those are high priority species, but it also includes species that we know very little about. They may not actually be declining, but we might not have any information about the population status, about their management needs, and so on. So here's a snapshot of just a partial list from our biodiversity portal that lists some of the bird species on there. You can see it goes from limpkin at the top down to painted bunting at the bottom. These pages include information about the federal, global, and state status of these species. It includes information about their habitat types around the state. And this helps to target our management actions utilizing this list. So I took that list and I just singled out these species that are predominantly forest and savanna and scrub habitat species. And I felt would be most of interest to this group. So it ranges from cerulean and golden wing warblers in the northern part of the state to swallowtail kites, southeastern American kestrel on down to shrikes, which is depicted in that picture right there. So these are species that we're focusing on in terms of developing forest and savanna and scrub habitat management guidelines, both for state properties, but also to provide assistance to private landowners. How to manage for them. The website at the top is the technical team report. If you go to that, you find not only the list of these species, but you also find short paragraph recommendations, general guidelines for landowners and folks who manage government properties to help increase populations of these priority bird species. And there are core principles that we always talk about when we discuss managing for bird species. Habitat diversity across the landscape as well as within stands. If you want the greatest diversity of bird species, you need a great diversity of habitat types in the landscape. When I take folks out on field trips, I always stand in front of a forest and I talk about layers. Birds rely on vertical structural diversity. Some species are canopy specialists. Some species feed and nest on the ground. Many species feed and nest in the mid-story. And so it's important to have habitat or tree and shrub structural layers in a community. It's also important to think about age diversity among stands. Some species, like cockaded woodpeckers, prefer what we call old growth stands. Then there are other species that like young regenerating forests, species like backman sparrows, for instance. Many species are dependent on riparian habitats, and some of them are what we call area sensitive. That is, they occur in riparian habitats, but if the riparian habitats on your property are very narrow in width, they may not occur there at all. They depend on very broad riparian corridors, species like prothonotary warblers, for instance. And oftentimes the context of the landscape matters a great deal to these species who occur in riparian habitats. So for instance, if you've got prothonotary warblers on your property, they're utilizing your riparian habitats, but the habitat adjoining your riparian habitat is a clear cut, they're less likely to be in that riparian forest than they would be if the adjoining habitat was another type of forest, such as a pine forest. So that matters, the juxtaposition of these habitat types. I mentioned regenerating young forest, frequent fire. Adam showed a fire slide. We do a great deal of prescribed burning on our properties every year, but also providing assistance to private landowners for them to bring fire to their properties, as well as training. And we do a lot of that in conjunction with the Georgia Forestry Commission and other partners to benefit species like bobwhite quail. Protecting dominant trees near water. 95% of the bald eagle nests in the state are found in pine trees. And they're generally found in dominant and co-dominant pine trees in groups of pines within a larger stand, and often within about a quarter of a mile of the nearest body of water, primarily large bodies of water. And so protecting those dominant trees, those clusters of dominant pine trees in your forested communities can matter a great deal to these species, as well as to swallowtail kites. Leaving scattered trees and snags, can't overemphasize the importance of dead trees. They have a great deal of value, not just to birds, but the things that occur in those dead trees that the birds are feeding upon. And varying the size and the shapes of clear cuts on the property matters a great deal. Linear clear cuts can provide more edge habitat for bird species. Controlling invasive species on properties. This has received a lot more emphasis in our forest management plans in the last 10 years. And Adam talked about this a little bit on state lands, but on private properties. And we can provide assistance to folks in helping them to figure out how to control invasive species on their properties. So how to get that assistance to do these kinds of things on your property? First of all, what species could occur on my property? How can I get habitat management recommendations? You can start by calling my office. Tell us what you're looking for. And we can put you in touch with the right people within the agency if those people aren't within my office. We've got a private lands program that's in the game management side of the house, but we work in conjunction with them, and we have our own private land specialist. That's the website to reach out to them. They've got what they call a bobwhite quail initiative for people who are specifically interested in learning about bringing more quail to their property. DNR works in conjunction with Quail Forever, a nonprofit, to develop management plans on private properties for that species. We also have what we call a forest stewardship program, and that is a partnership that involves DNR, Georgia Forestry Commission, the National Resources Conservation Service. And together, these agencies visit your property and literally write a management plan for you based on the objectives you want, objectives they recommend to you that you can implement on your property. They'll also provide you with assistance with regards to how do I get money from the Farm Bill, for instance, what programs would best benefit me. The Wildlife Conservation section, my section, works a program called the Forestry for Wildlife Partnership. It is directly connected to the SWAP, and basically we send somebody out to your property and we look at the SWAP and we say, these are the priorities that the state has identified for benefiting these high priority bird species. These bird species on that list could occur on your property or are already here. Here's what we recommend to help you improve habitat for those species. And we can help you get assistance with a management plan, perhaps financial assistance. And every year, usually 3 to 5 entities are selected and recognized statewide as receiving a Forestry for Wildlife Partnership award, so to speak. They end up going to meet the governor and we have a photo shoot, and it's just really nice recognition for people who do this. I will say with the partnership, that this is currently designed for folks who own at least 10,000 acres. There's a safe harbor program, which primarily focuses on red-cockaded woodpeckers and how you can bring them to your property or enhance your property if you already have them without having environmental restrictions, further environmental restrictions placed on the way you manage your property. And if you're interested in talking about conservation easements, we've got specialists who can come out and talk to you about doing this as well. Voluntary public access. I'll run through this quickly. So what is it? DNR gets money via grants to help pay for this. And basically the way it works is we pay a lease fee to folks like you for public access to well-managed habitat for outdoor recreation. It can be for access by hunters, by folks who want to fish, by folks who want to go bird watching on your property. And the size of the properties can range from as small as 10 acres up to 5,000 acres. I think the largest one we have in there right now is a mountain in North Georgia, and that is a bit over 5,000 acres. And I know there's one property in there right now that's about 75 acres. There are 16 of the VPAs in Georgia right now. They range from Dade County in the Northwest to Clinch County down at the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. We are currently using a checklist to assess all 16 of them and talking with the owners of those properties about how we could perhaps provide more public access to them for bird watchers, because every one of those to date has primarily been arranged for hunting and fishing. Well, we want to expand that so that birders have access to most of these properties too, provided the landowners find that that's acceptable to them. Okay, so these are citizen-owned properties. They can be owned by timber companies, timber investment management organizations, or agricultural producers. Benefits to the landowner. So what do you get out of this? There are financial incentives based on acres. Like I said, there's a lease fee, the recreation type that's offered, and the habitats that are available. Obviously, we want to target certain kinds of habitats that are especially rare. We want to offer up opportunities to the public that they find very difficult to get to now. They can be single-year contracts or multi-year, and the landowner is protected under Georgia law from liability. And so here's the best part for you. You get free wildlife habitat technical assistance if you sign up for this. There's flexibility in setting the dates for access and for the types of use. What are the benefits to the recreationists? Well, I've talked a little bit about this. People currently visit the existing 16 VPAs for hunting for species like deer and dove and turkey. It meets an increased hunter demand for public dove fields and waterfowl areas. We're always getting this question from the public. Can't we have access to more lands for pursuing our outdoor recreational pursuits? Fishing by river access in areas where boat ramps currently are lacking, and opportunities for folks to go just hiking, bird watching or other wildlife watching. So if you visit this website and you scroll down it, it will basically repeat everything I've just told you, and you'll see a link that says click here if you'd like to inquire and if you'd like to have your property considered under the VPA program. And it's real easy. What comes up is this one-page form that you fill out and then you submit it. And the guy who manages it for the agency is Kevin Lowry. That's his email address there if you'd like to get more information about it. I will mention too that at the end of Adam's talk, he talked about birding trails. This is one of the many ways in which we partner with Georgia Audubon and the 7 other Audubon chapters in the state. There's currently a coastal birding trail with stops all along the coast from just south of Savannah down to the Cumberland Island area. There's a website that I can send to you if you contact me, where you can get information about these stops on the coastal birding trail As Adam mentioned, there's also a Southern Rivers birding trail, and we're currently updating all this information on our website, so people can go to the website and they can say, I'd like to go bird watching in the Moultrie area, for instance. And you can find public access stops on that trail site where you can open it up and it tells you what to expect if you visit that property, how big it is, what the habitat types are like, what the trail system look like, what bird species you might happen to encounter, the hours of the day that the property is accessible to the public. So it's a really interesting interactive tool. And we've updated that with the coastal birding trail website. And we're, as I said, in the process of doing that with the Southern Rivers birding trail. And it's going to hopefully include a lot of these VPAs that I've been talking about here. And so I hope I didn't along you with a bunch of stuff or race through that too fast, but that's my contact information. As I said, phone number, if you want to reach out to me and talk to me about some of these things. I would probably direct you to some of our habitat management experts who got folks who do this all the time and are much more knowledgeable than I am about this. That's my email address there. I hope to hear from you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about these programs.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that insight. And I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions from our attendees today. Y'all feel free to come off mute or submit something in the chat, and we'll get it to these experts. So in the meantime, I do have a quick question. Adam, you touched on this a little bit in terms of the kind of hotspots around the state. You know, within those hotspots, are there any of those like kind of paid opportunities that birders, you know, pay for? And then kind of what's the process for a birder to access that type of thing?
Yeah, in Ebird, those places are listed, but there isn't an option through that website and database to figure that out. What they normally would say would be, Adams Forest, then it'd be like limited access or restricted access, something along those lines. And so using just Ebird, that can be confusing. You don't know how to get there. There are certain places, one I can think of off the top of my head, down in Brunswick, at Andrews Island, which is Army Corps and DOT site, which is great birding, but they don't let people in there too often, but it's a desirable spot. So you need to mainly go through the Georgia Ornithological Society or know the right people. But that's where I think something could be worked out either with some of the DNR programs or with us, where either we have those listed on our sites or we make it easier to facilitate those access, getting out to those places. So you can have them on those sites and you can put limited access or restricted. That way you're not getting people just showing up trying to get down there. But you would need a third party or someone to help get the word out and facilitate maybe that access.
What in terms of kind of what the market will bear from a birding lease perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish I knew more. This is somewhat new, and also with the voluntary access program, there might be some similarities there. Looking at some of the other examples, I've seen a few that in preparation to this, I mentioned some of those ranches, for example, in Texas. Those are some well-known spots where you can go bird, and some of them, were $20-30 a day to get access to go birding. Some had a higher price tag. I don't know what the appetite would be for someone to get out to pay, a bunch. Some of it, I think, depends honestly on what the birds that are present are. If it's just a really great, healthy patch of, hardwoods and pines, and it's on a creek, I think people would enjoy to go there. But if it's not something super rare or uncommon or reliable for certain species, they might be less likely to pay just because it's, they're going for a good time. They might stumble into something. Like Bob said, if you have a nice stand of Voluntary warblers or Swainson's warblers, or you do have a safe harbor for one of these RCWs, that would probably make it easier to get some return, because those are the birds people are really gonna make effort to go see. You know, Bob mentioned how he has gone on trips and all sorts of stuff, and I do some of that as well. But I mean, at least once a year, I normally stop at Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge and Riverbend WMA to look for red-cockaded woodpeckers, Bachman sparrows, and then often Swainson's warblers. So I make that journey no matter what each year. And so if there was a spot that had those species and some of the others that Bob mentioned that they're managing for, even things like Bob White, which are getting trickier to find, people would seek those out. But to your original question, I honestly don't know quite what that would look like yet. I mean, this idea is somewhat new for us, and you know, I guess to be determined somewhat.
It'll be an interesting experience, I think, and you know, one that I think will take some time to kind of figure out, because it's not as prevalent as, you know, say deer leases or something along those lines.
You know, one thing real quick, Matt, I don't want to
Yeah.
cut you off, but one thing I was thinking about, you know, like the duck stamp, this is a whole different model, but you know, the duck stamp is there, and it's mainly for, or supposed to be geared for hunters and others, but birders purchase those like crazy, you know, and they use those to get access to those types of things. It's a different model, but I just wanted to illustrate that birders do, as both Bob and I mentioned, they do spend their money. They do want to pay to get access to good habitat. And it's, you know, even things that might traditionally be thought of as, you know, hey, you know, hunting lease makes sense here or whatever makes sense. I think there are plenty of opportunities, if we can carve it out right, for birding to be one of those opportunities as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just wanted
No,
to
that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. One other thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is a little bit outside of kind of what we came here to talk about, but I think is relevant nonetheless, is there is a, you know, kind of growing recognition of forests as a solution to some of our biggest challenges as a state, whether that be, you know, carbon sequestration, whether it be, you know, alternatives to plastics, whether it be, or other carbon intensive materials, whether that be water. And so part of our job at the association is to kind of highlight those synergies. And, you know, in a lot of ways, working forests are good for bird habitat, or creating bird habitat and maintaining those habitats that you know, keep some of our migratory birds intact. And so I guess what is the best way for us to think about educating, I guess, the bird community and, you know, Metro Atlantans and others kind of about that concept?
That's a good one. You mean kind of the benefits of kind of the working forest, I guess, or the working lands, or some of the of all that stuff. You know, it should be something that you know, we definitely could, and I think do more so now, play a role in that, and can do more, because I kind of very quickly mentioned the whole coffee thing, and that's the same concept, just down in Central America and Northern South America, where the way the beans are produced and the way the land is, you know, managed, kind of like how Bob mentioned, by keeping intact diversity of trees and of structure and layers, how that's good for our birds down there. So I think there should be an opportunity to try to take that same message and highlight the benefits of a properly, you know, managed, you know, stand here in Georgia. It's the exact same thing. But yeah, I think if the education is kind of the main lacking, especially for, like you said, a lot of the people who fit into our membership, birders, and, you know, we're still pretty heavily Atlanta based in our membership, since that's what we were just a year ago. Maybe that's something we could explore working on with some producers and land managers, and some of the programs that DNR has to help, you know, maybe highlight that program. I know Bob mentioned for their one program, they do highlight some of the larger land owners who are doing, the right things for wildlife. So maybe there's opportunities for groups like us and other non-government agencies to put together some messaging on that.
Matt, as you know, we do work with GFA in public education endeavors. We, news releases, information on our website, public presentations that we give with regards to demonstrating how forest management directly benefits bird conservation. There is, of course, a certain element of knee-jerk reaction that any kind of logging operation is by definition bad for birds. The clear cuts, unfortunately, in the eyes of a lot of folks, represent just environmental destruction as opposed to appealing to a different suite of bird species that utilize early successional habitats. And so, we have to reach the public, of course, through the media that they use these days, which is social. And so we do provide videos to the public via social media with regards to a burn that was done in a forest or a logging operation that was done on one of our state lands, and why that was done and what the long-term benefits of that might be. And I think that, those partnerships involving GFA, DNR, Georgia Audubon, other entities who have, a strong stake in bird conservation, doing mutual public outreach efforts using social media, but also whenever possible, inviting birding groups to, industrial timber properties, industrial forestry properties, to show them a sort of behind the scenes look, come on out and do some bird watching. We'll have you out here, meet our forester, and let's tell you why we're doing what we're doing. And so you see more than just stumps in a landscape. You see what that landscape's going to look like in the next 4 years and how that's going to benefit prairie warblers.
I think that's a great point because, especially when you mentioned kind of using Metro Atlanta as an example. I think a lot of people, and most of my background is in, bird behavior and ecology and not in proper management. Just they don't know, and so it's hard for them to even understand, like Bob said, the importance and what that is going to look like and why it's done. And, we, even with our restoration work, which has been pretty small, that's something we've had to deal with what types of plants or if any sort of, certain places impacted or this one little tree is going to go down or something like that. It's sometimes missing the bigger point. So I do think if you can get people out, again, not just to say, hey, we're here, because we can facilitate some of that. But yeah, I think getting people out and educating would be awesome, just so they can see it and then get out there and realize that there is wildlife and that it is vital. And like Bob mentioned, especially that kind of scrub early successional habitat is a lot of those birds are kind of imperiled, and it'd be a good thing to highlight is that transition.
Well, I will go ahead and commit to both of you that we should do a video of some type that would be, something good that we could collaborate on for social media and good to introduce, kind of that concept of working forest, but also, what types of birds thrive in those early successional forests and why diversity is important and all of those things. So we'll circle back on that definitely. Well, thank both of you for your time today. This has been a great presentation, and I'm excited that Adam, I didn't let you get like halfway done before I started recording the presentation. So we've got most of the good stuff anyway. So we'll make this available to folks afterwards. I'm gonna kind of stop there and talk a little bit about some GFA initiatives while everybody's on the phone, and I'll try to do this quickly so that we don't eat up too much of everyone's day. Bear with me real quick, and I'll get my PowerPoint set up. the main things that I wanted to highlight for you all today, for those of you who don't know, our work is really divided into these 5 categories. Advocacy, lobbying really at the state capitol, and then also working with local and federal officials is at the keystone of our work. Our president and CEO, Andres Villegas, is actually with a group of congressional staffers today and couldn't be on the call, but he sends his regards. Dale Green from the University of Georgia and Tim Lowermore from the Georgia Forestry Commission are kind of taking those congressional staffers on a tour of South Georgia. Also membership, making sure that we're adding value to you all, management, making sure that we're being good stewards of your membership dollars, communications, which we talked about a little bit today, and then our foundation, which is really looking forward to the next 10 to 15 years, what is going to make our land sustainable and profitable into the future. This is our team. One quick note that I wanted to make: on the call with us today is Tim Miller. Tim is our membership director, and he is kind of your go-to guy, so to speak, in terms of if you have any issues that you need to talk with us about on the advocacy side, on the education side. Tim will be there to kind of help you through that process. Of course, you can always contact me. If it gets buried in my inbox, it's probably because I'm buried in there as well. So Tim can help me dig it out. In addition, just one additional highlight, Tom Byer, who was our Vice President of Government Affairs, took another job with a firm in Atlanta this past month. And so we actually recently going to announce that Craig Anderson, who is legislative director for Austin Scott for the last 7 years, will be joining our team as Director of Government Affairs. We're excited to have Craig on our team. He's worked on the Farm Bill and many agricultural issues for Austin Scott. And as you guys know, Austin Scott is a champion for forestry and agriculture in the state. So that's going to be a good addition to our team. A quick note of, some data that we pulled from the census, and this kind of ties into the comments that were made from Bob and Adam on urbanization, but we pulled this data from the census, and the one thing that I just want to highlight here is Georgia is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and we have some of the fastest growing counties in the nation. They're adding population exponentially, and it is without a doubt having an impact on land use. But in addition to that, it's having impact on representation. And so from an educational perspective in our schools, in our communities, and then also from an advocacy perspective, our work at the Georgia Forestry Association and Foundation is becoming more and more important. And so your investment in the association and foundation is not going to waste at all. One quick note on advocacy. We have 2 tax bills that we're working on this year. One is related to the severance tax on timber. In Georgia, we're currently unique that we pay 100% of the fair market value of timber. We're taxed at that rate at the time of harvest, and we'd like to reduce that to 40%, like other real property, like your house, your car, or any other property that you may own. That has a big impact on landowners, and will certainly be an issue that is important. The second one is actually the third point here, but is the ad valorem tax on logging equipment. Loggers are the only people in the agriculture industry who are required to pay ad valorem tax on equipment. And so we'd like to look at that and change that statute. Both of those bills will require, because they are tax legislation, they will require a 2/3 vote and a statewide referendum to approve them. And so the majority of voters in the general election will have to hit the check mark on both of those. So it'll be important to stay engaged on those issues. Another thing from a private property perspective is hunting without permission. We'll be continuing our discussion on House Bill 343 that we introduced last year, but did not move all the way through the legislative process. And we'll focus on really increasing penalties for repeat offenders. So, your guy that's repeatedly coming out onto a property after being warned and maybe saying that he's doing something else on the property. I'm decked out in camo, but I'm not hunting. And Tim could probably spot a hunter from a mile away. So I know we all could as well. The final thing is really addressing our trucking crisis. As many of you know, our harvest and haul sector is in a really tough situation right now. And it really comes down to three things. It comes down to a lack of drivers. We're currently in a nationwide driver shortage right now, and the increased pressure on commercial vehicles has actually increased the amount of people who are leaving our industry and going and working for folks like Walmart or the ports where they can make a little bit more money. That's not a bad thing, but it's just increasing the pressure on our loggers. And then in addition to that, Georgia has some of the highest insurance rates in the South, partially due to a lack of insurance providers. But, in addition to that, the costs of claims have went up tremendously. So the amount of kind of policy limit claims that have been enacted over the last 10 to 20 years have really put a lot of pressure on that industry. And what you see is, an increase of from $22,000, $2,500 a truck to $20,000 a truck on premiums. And so those two issues have put a lot of pressure on the industry. It's removed essentially the ability for logging companies to make a profit on their harvesting jobs. And so the way that we're looking at it right now is if you don't have a driver and you don't have a truck to be insured, it really doesn't matter what the weights on the road will be. So we need to address all three of those things: labor, insurance, and certainly weights. We do believe that there's opportunity to work with the governor's office on an executive order that can address some of these issues. And so that is kind of currently at the forefront of our work. So I'll stop there, knowing that we're going kind of over time, and I will pause and see if there are any additional questions on the GFA side or with our friends who are our guest speakers.